Hello everybody, my name is James Davies and I'd like to welcome you to a new season of Photo Chat Vlog. I hope to be covering more of my adventures in film photography, and I want to kick off this episode with a discussion about intentional double exposures. So the images I'll be discussing today are all taken on films which have been through the camera more than once and were taken by me in collaboration with other people. I'm also going to start this episode with a little explanation of how double exposures work on film. So in order to talk about double exposures, I thought it would be a good idea to give a very basic explanation of how camera film works, just in case you weren't familiar with analogue photography. Now some people call it analogue film, but there isn't any digital film. There's only analogue or digital photography. I suspect film is so called because it is a thin layer, and it's actually a plastic base for layers of light-sensitive emulsion. When light falls onto the emulsion, there is a physical and a chemical change, and we call this an exposure. You can get film in sheets or on a roll, and both rolls and sheets come in different sizes for big or small cameras, and it's roll film that I am explaining here. So here is our roll of film on this imaginary sheet of paper. Now with a roll of film, there is fresh, unexposed emulsion on one end of the roll, and your pictures taken on exposed emulsion are rolled up at the other end. Now some people might already say that this film is ruined, because of course it's sensitive to light, and therefore you can only handle it in complete darkness unless you want to expose all of the film in one go and end up with a blank film. But this of course is the imaginary land of description, so you'll have to suspend your disbelief whilst I try and explain things. But it is a valid point, because in order to use the film, we do have to protect it from light until we want to use it, and so we put it in an enclosed space, our camera. Now the word camera is a shortening of the Latin camera obscura, which means dark chamber. And yes, I looked that up on Wikipedia. So here's our camera, and that has a lens and a shutter on the front. The shutter keeps the light out of the camera until we need it. What typically happens when you use a camera is you find something to photograph, such as this tree, and you focus the beams of light that are illuminating the tree through the lens so that they will fall onto the film. Then, when you click the shutter, the light is let in through the lens and the film is exposed, and it records the image on the sensitive layers. And what normally happens then is that you wind on the film, which means you move the piece of the film you just exposed out of the way of the shutter, and this means that what you just photographed is safely stored away from light, and some new, fresh, unexposed emulsion is moved along in its place, ready for use. You then find something else to photograph, for example this person, and you focus, and you press the shutter, and the same thing happens. Their image is recorded on the exposed film, and you repeat this until you've used up all of the fresh film on the roll. Since the film is considered used or finished when it is exposed, you often hear of a 35mm film being described as a 24 exposure film or a 36 exposure film. And what this really means is that a rolled up 36 exposure film is longer in length than a 24 exposure film. You then have the film processed, which very basically speaking is a two-stage process involving wet chemistry. The first stage is developing, and that makes the image we recorded on the exposed emulsion visible, and the second stage is fixing, which stops the film being sensitive to light. That's the reason why I wanted to explain the basics of film at the start of an explanation of intentional double exposures, because until the film is actually chemically fixed, it remains sensitive to light, even after it has been exposed. So, going back to our camera, we find our tree, focus it through the lens, we take the picture, and it's exposed on the film. Normally we would wind the film on, but if we don't do this, and there are a number of methods and reasons why this might happen, and we then go and find our person, and focus them, and take the picture, they will be exposed on the same piece of film as our tree, and the two images will be combined, and that is what I am calling a double exposure. Now, a double exposure can be an accident. Check out Season 1, Episode 8 of Photo Chat Vlog for an explanation of what I think was an accidental double exposure. But the pictures I want to talk about today were intentional double exposures, in that I decided to collaborate with some friends to combine images from our separate lives through the camera and onto film. So this photo was a collaboration between me and my friend Andy, and it was one of the first collaborative intentional double exposures that I did, and it's from back in January 2009. The way that I did all of the photos that I'm showing you today was to load a camera with film and shoot the whole roll going about my everyday life. Then I would rewind the film back into the canister and reload it into the same camera, but this time I'd give the camera to a friend. They would then take photos what's going about their everyday life, and their images would be exposed on top of mine. The super cool thing about this is that neither of us would know what the other had taken photos of, and even if the first person had made a list of the shots they had taken, there would be no way that the second person could know exactly what the first set of photos would look like. So serendipity plays a big part in the final result of an experiment like this. Now this photo came from a roll of old expired film, which was probably from a batch of Superdrug films that my mate Hambo gave me. Superdrug is a chain of chemist shops here in the UK, and Hambo is a great photographer that moved on to digital years ago, and he let me have his old films. The camera we were using was an Olympus AF10, which is a standard point-and-shoot automatic camera from the late 20th century, i.e. the 80s or the 90s. I can't remember if Andy took the first set of images or if I did, but what's interesting here is that what you can see is actually a three-way collaboration, because when I reloaded the film, although I tried to guess how I had originally loaded it, I evidently couldn't get the film to load up in exactly the same place the second time around, with the result that one set of the images overlaps the other. So the image that you're seeing here was actually the decision of the photo processor, who decided to frame the image for scanning based on one of the set of images. And so what we can see is a photo of a bricked up window, combined with the image of a goose or some other waterfowl. I'm not exactly sure if it's a goose or a duck, so I'm going to call it a goose from now on, and an image of some blue sky. Now I took the image of the bricked up window, and that was taken in Pusey Street in the centre of Oxford, which was where I was living at the time. Andy took the image of the goose and the other image of the blue sky and the tree, and I think they were taken along the River Thames in Oxford, which is near to where Andy lives. Now Andy is a really interesting artist and he is a great photographer, so I knew he would take some cool shots, and the one of the goose is just fantastic because it's exactly the sort of image that he would shoot. I remember getting the images back from the processor and just being so amazed at what came out. And I could easily devote a whole episode to just this one roll of film, because there are so many great photos on it. But there are other images that I want to show you as well. Nevertheless, it is fair to say that if we printed this photo and put it in a gallery, and we told our friends to come along and look, they would all know exactly which image Andy shot and which one I did, because he really puts his heart and soul into his work, and his heart and soul is pretty off the wall. Which is another amazing thing about the image, because of course he didn't know that I had actually taken a photograph of the wall, and so he couldn't have predicted that this off-the-wall goose would end up actually on a wall as a result of our experiment. Now I explained earlier how film remains sensitive to light until it's fixed, and there's something happening in this shot which I think I understand technically, and I'll try and explain. So because the image of the goose was probably taken when it was sitting on dark water, the majority of the bricks in the image of the window remain relatively clear, because the dark water wouldn't make much of an exposure on the film. This makes the white goose really pop out where it is visible, to the extent where in places it is almost perfectly exposed, like at the top of the image of the goose. And this makes it look completely surreal, even where it fades out towards the bottom of the image. And it's one of the things that I love about this type of intentional double exposure. In particular, the difference in scale between the window and the goose means it looks enormous, and it gives the whole image a feeling of the absurd and dreamlike quality of, say, early Salvador Dali paintings. But the other thing that I love in this image, and again it's totally down to chance how this happened, is how the image in the first left-hand third of the image of the blue sky, it neatly lines up with the left-hand side of the bricked up window. We'd have had a hard time actually doing this if either of us had wanted this to happen, and yet it turned out completely great by accident. You can see here too how the much brighter image of the blue sky and the tree has washed out the image of the bricks. Now, to a lot of people this image would just look like a total mess. It looks like a disaster, or it might just look plain nonsense. And that would be fair enough if my intention had been to just take an image of the window. But I set out to collaborate with Andy and to make an experimental image by making a double exposure on film. And this is what we got, and I absolutely love it. Now, the next image is a collaboration from springtime in 2010 between me and my friend Tomomi, who is Japanese. We were both living in Oxford and working at the same place at the time we made this image, but she was actually going back to visit her family in Tokyo for a couple of weeks, so I asked her if she wanted to do an experiment with the camera and take a roll of film of her daily life in Japan while she was out there, and that I would then take photographs on top of it, and our images would combine in interesting ways from when the film was developed. And she said yes, and this is one of the images that came out of the collaboration. Now, I think Tomomi took the first set of images because I remember meeting up with her late at night before she set off, and I handed her the camera, and the chances of me having a camera ready with a fully exposed film are quite unlikely. I do remember for sure that the camera we used was a Vivitar Ultra Wide and Slim, and that we used something like standard 200 ASA Kodak film, but I don't have an actual recollection of the exact film stock that we used. So in the image that you can see now, I took the main image, as it were, which is of the back gate of the garden of the building where we both worked at the time. And again, you can see that it's this image that the processor chose to base the scan on. The gate is a big heavy iron and wood security gate, which is actually half open, and it is surrounded by blue sky, and there are some plants on the left hand side. And you should also be able to see something on the edge of the gate, and this is a steel heart-shaped fridge magnet. I stuck the magnet to the gate as a surprise for anyone who passed through the gate, and I like the idea of someone taking it and giving it a new life, either on their own fridge or as a gift for someone that they were fond of. Tomomi took her pictures in this image in a food shop in Japan. It's possibly a convenience store, which is a commonplace thing in Japan. So on the right hand side you can see some food items on some horizontal shelves, and they're interesting in their own way. I can see some sushi, for example, and that sort of stuff looks pretty cool and surreal floating over the door in the sky. But it's on the left hand side where things get really interesting for me. On that side you can see an image of a chiller cabinet stocked with drinks cartons, but because of the angle which Tomomi took the photo at, and because of the way that the images overlap, it also looks like rays beaming out of the magnetic heart stuck to the side of the gate. Well, at least it does to me. So we have the chance combination of two images of a food shop in Tokyo, double exposed onto an image of a gate in a garden in Oxford, coming together via a photo processor to make a third fantastical image that looks to me like beams of love. Again, maybe it looks like a disaster to some people, but I'm really fond of it, both as a memento of a creative project with a friend, but also because this could only have happened quite by chance, and because we were using a film camera to do this. As with the first image, neither of us knew what the other was taking an image of, and neither of us had to put any special effort into what we were doing. But whereas the first image that you saw, which Andy and I did, was a combination of images taken in the same town, this one is a combination of images taken thousands of miles apart, and somehow it turned out excellent. There is one more thing to mention, and that is that somebody took the magnetic heart not long after this photo was taken, and I hope it lives on somewhere with a new purpose in someone else's life. And so the final image for today is a collaboration between me and my friend Anna. We were also using a Vivitar Ultra Wide and Slim, but I haven't got a clue what the film was. I just made no record of it. But what I can tell you though, was that Anna first took the camera to Bangalore in India on a business trip, and I then took photographs over the top of her images. I can also tell you exactly when I took my image, which was on the 30th of March 2013. I was visiting the city of Liverpool in the UK that day, and I'd been to an exhibition about glam rock at the Tate Gallery there, and I took a number of images on that day in Liverpool as part of this collaboration. Now, as with the other collaborations I was explaining in this video, there are a whole bunch of great images on this film which resulted from our experiments with double exposures. And I chose this one just because everything amazing that I've described about the other two images, everything to do with chance and composition for example, applies to this one too. So it might be just easier if I explain what I can see and what I can remember from my part in the collaboration. I took my photo at the Albert Dock in Liverpool, which is a tourist attraction down on the River Mersey. So the buildings that you can see with the red pillars are in the Albert Dock, as I think are the clouds. But reading from left to right, you can also see a light leak, which is cool, a car, a cow, part of a jeep, somebody on a scooter, a telegraph pole, and part of a person. And I think they're all part of the image that Anna took whilst she was over in Bangalore. To me, it does look like a dream in many ways. There is a surreal aspect to the composition of things, like the way the road and the water seem to merge around the cow, and how the traffic starts to float as the two images combine. And there's also something interesting going on with the exposure in the sky, where the clouds of Liverpool interact with what look like trees in Bangalore. And if you look closely near the scooter rider, you can see something like a rickshaw, but with the mast of a ship coming out of it. So again, what's great about this being on film is what I'll call the blindfolded aspect to it. Neither of us knew what the other was taking a photograph of. And one of the best things about doing this on film is that you have no choice over the placement of the images. What you see is untouched and straight out of the camera. The only compositional decision, again, was made by the photo processor and where they chose to scan it. Now I know, because I've done it, if I'd taken two digital images and combined them on the computer in a software package, it would be just too easy to think, well, if I just moved the cow 2 centimetres to the right and then made sure that the light leak was cropped out and I adjusted the exposure and so on and so on and so on, I would work on this and it would lose that chance composition. I'd be making too many decisions about exposing both images, and it just wouldn't be the same. You don't get any choice with this analogue method of combining images in a double exposure on film. You just have to see what comes out. And since this was an accessory project for us both, and by that I mean I took other images with a different camera to remember my trip to Liverpool by, and I'm guessing that Anna did the same thing for her trip to Bangalore, the two worlds that we visited literally collide on the film that was running through the camera. And it's a really interesting way to reflect on the variety of life that's on the planet. Now, fantastical as the image is, I do hope that no one who might be watching this from either Liverpool or Bangalore is offended by how we mashed up the two images. Again, neither of us knew what was going to happen, but I think the end result is amazing. So there we have 3 examples of intentional double exposures. I have other examples of other types of double exposures, and I hope to chat about some of these in other episodes of Photo Chat Vlog. So if you like what you see today, stick with me. And of course, please feel free to like the video, leave a comment, or subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next episode of Photo Chat Vlog.